Slavery, a disgraceful chapter in human history, was abolished over a century ago. Yet, in ways both overt and subtle, the legacy of slavery continues to shape our world. In a twisted attempt to legitimize the barbaric treatment they inflicted upon black slaves, white supremacists and slaveholders spread harmful stereotypes and falsehoods about the nature of black people. These distortions were used to excuse their cruelty. The lingering effects of this systematic oppression continue to plague our society with racial injustice and inequality. That said, join us as we take a close look into the unknown facts about slavery that still manifest in our lives today. From the language we use to the stereotypes that persist. These remnants of the past are more influential than you might think. In the era of slavery, slave owners came up with various ways to humiliate their slaves, usually as a form of punishment or discipline. Number 1. Sexual abuse. One of the most horrible forms of humiliation involved forcing enslaved men into sexual acts with their mothers or family members. This was done both as a form of psychological torture and to exert control and dominance over enslaved individuals. Enslaved men were sometimes forced to perform sexual acts in the presence of their families or white spectators, turning these acts into public spectacles of degradation. The term is thought to have originated from this context of sexual humiliation. But although the term is frequently believed to stem from the widely condemned incest taboo, some also argue that its origins point to white men that have impregnated black women at the time. The sexual abuse of enslaved women often resulted in pregnancies, with the children of these abuses being enslaved alongside their mothers. Rather than referring to the man who impregnated their mother as father, the term was said to be used. This usage aligns with similar grammatical structures found in other African American English expressions, such as baby mother and baby father. Despite the end of slavery, the term mother persisted in American English, especially within African American communities. Over time, the term has been adopted into mainstream language, often losing its specific historical connotations, but still carrying a strong sense of vulgarity and insult. Meanwhile, some argue that this origin is merely a theory that lacks concrete evidence. What do you think? Number 2. Sagging pants. Young men in America began adopting sagging pants as a fashion trend during the 1990s. Unlike many other passing fads, this particular style has endured for over 30 years. However, its origins are rooted in a dark and often overlooked history. The practice began during the era of black slavery and is linked to a horrific custom known as buckbusting or buck-breaking. Originally, these terms referred to the taming of wild horses, but Southern plantation owners repurposed them to describe their brutal treatment of black men. This barbaric practice was used to break rebellious black male slaves, reducing them to subhuman status, much like taming wild beings. It was designed to intimidate and suppress any resistance among other enslaved people. Defiant black men were publicly humiliated by being made to lower their pants and bend forward in front of other slaves. Their masters would then subject them to horrific sexual violence. Following this brutal act, the victim was forced to wear his pants without a belt, allowing them to sag as a mark of his humiliation and submission, signifying that he had been busted or broken in. The practice of sagging pants also traces its origins to the American prison system. Much like in the antebellum era, it is linked to the sexual abuse of men by other men. In prisons, belts are prohibited because they can be used as weapons, which is why inmates often wear sagging pants. In some cases, men are coerced into letting their pants fall and bending over during assault by fellow inmates. Today, sagging pants, a style often embraced as a mere fashion statement, has drifted far from its traumatic origins. Many who adopt this look remain unaware of its painful history, and despite various efforts over the years to discourage young men from adopting this style due to its troubling origins, these attempts have largely been unsuccessful. Number 3. The Jezebel stereotype. Historically, white women were depicted as embodiments of self-respect and control, while black women were portrayed as naturally promiscuous and even predatory, a characterization symbolized by the name Jezebel. Jezebel is derived from the biblical queen Jezebel, who is portrayed as a wicked and promiscuous woman. During slavery, this character was appropriated to describe black women as inherently sexual and promiscuous, a stereotype used to rationalize and justify the sexual exploitation and abuse of enslaved women by portraying them as desiring such treatment. During the slavery era, lighter-skinned black women were often forced into prostitution or became concubines under a system called placage, where they received financial support in exchange for their sexual services. This exploitation was partially fueled by European misinterpretations of African cultures and physical appearances, which were seen as evidence of uncontrolled sexual appetites. The Jezebel stereotype was also used to rationalize the sexual exploitation of black women by white men during slavery. The myth that black women had an insatiable sexual desire served to justify and obscure the frequent abuse of enslaved women. While some enslaved women might have been coerced into sexual relations with white men through force, the stereotype denied the reality of their exploitation. Slavery perpetuated the Jezebel stereotype by publicly exposing the bodies of enslaved women during sales and examinations, which reinforced racist notions of their sexual depravity. The forced reproduction of enslaved women was another way their sexuality was exploited and dehumanized, as their fertility was seen as a commodity to increase the slave population. Even after emancipation and throughout the Reconstruction period, black women continued to face sexual victimization. Despite the end of slavery, legal and social systems offered little protection against sexual abuse, and many black women were reluctant to report abuse due to fears of further violence or retribution. The portrayal of black women as Jezebels persisted into the 20th century, becoming a pervasive theme in popular culture. In cinema, particularly during the black exploitation era of the 1970s, black women were often cast in sexually provocative roles that further entrenched the Jezebel image. This depiction continued into modern media, where black actresses are frequently typecast in sexually charged roles, often perpetuating racist stereotypes. Number 4. The welfare queen stereotype. The term welfare queen is not just a modern slur, but has roots tracing back to the era of slavery in the United States. During slavery, white slave owners often portrayed their enslaved individuals as lazy to justify the harsh conditions they faced. This negative image was used to rationalize the brutal treatment and systemic oppression of black people. The welfare queen stereotype emerged later as a way to demean and degrade black women who relied on government assistance. It portrayed these women as lazy and exploitative, suggesting they were abusing the welfare system for personal gain. This was a false and damaging narrative, as many black women were struggling under the weight of systemic racism and poverty. The stereotype gained attention in the 1970s with the case of Linda Taylor, who became widely known for her alleged involvement in welfare fraud. The media coverage of Linda Taylor was highly sensationalized. Headlines often focused on her alleged luxurious lifestyle and extravagant spending, despite the fact that she was a single mother living in poverty. They framed her as a welfare queen who exploited the welfare system. This portrayal was heavily racialized and sexualized, aligning with the existing Jezebel stereotype that black women were sexually immoral. The sensationalist media coverage depicted Taylor as a manipulative figure who used her sexuality to defraud the system, reinforcing the idea that black women on welfare were untrustworthy and hypersexual. Politicians and commentators leveraged Taylor's case to push for welfare reforms, arguing that the system was being abused by irresponsible and immoral individuals. They used her case to justify cuts to social programs and harsher eligibility requirements, framing her alleged fraudulent activities as representative of broader issues within welfare. This portrayal not only stigmatized Black women, but also ignored the complex realities of welfare dependency and systemic issues affecting many recipients. The troubling times of slavery might be over, but the hurt it caused still lives on. To truly honor the memory of those who endured the horrors of slavery, we must actively learn and acknowledge the remnants of that oppressive era. By fostering empathy, education, and cultural sensitivity, we can contribute to a more just and equitable future for all. Together, we can make a world where everyone feels safe and valued. Now, we want to hear from you. What other surprising ways does slavery continue to shape our society? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation and work towards a better understanding. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Subscribe to our channel, be part of our insightful discussions. We'd love to see you again.